The sun was just beginning to filter through the hotel curtains when the shrill sound of my phone shattered the morning's tranquility. I was in Seville, a city that had seemed magical until then, with its narrow streets and the scent of orange blossoms permeating the air. It was my first visit to Andalusia, and although work always absorbed me, I couldn't help feeling excited about the challenge this meeting with a potential client represented. I tossed and turned in the sheets, groping for my phone on the bedside table. When I saw Paul's name on the screen, an involuntary smile spread across my face. It was odd for him to call at that hour, knowing I would be getting ready for the day, but I assumed he wanted to wish me luck before my important presentation. "Good morning, darling," I answered in a drowsy yet affectionate tone. "What's up? You can't go even a couple of days without me." The silence on the other end left me momentarily bewildered. Then Paul's voice came through, clear and cold, as if reciting a rehearsed script. "Carmen, we need to talk. I'm in the process of divorcing you." Those words hit me like a bucket of ice water. My mind went blank for a moment, unable to process what I'd just heard. Divorce? What was he talking about? What? Paul, what are you saying? If this is a joke, it's not funny at all, I managed to stammer, my voice trembling slightly. "It's no joke, Carmen," he continued, his tone completely devoid of emotion. "I've sold our apartment in Madrid. I already have the papers ready. When you get back, you'll have to find somewhere else to live." It felt as though the ground had vanished beneath my feet. 10 years of marriage, all our plans, our dreams. Was it all reduced to this cold phone call? But why? What happened? "Paul, we can talk about this. Fix whatever's wrong," I pleaded, my mind racing frantically for an explanation, a solution. His dry laugh over the line sent shivers down my spine. "There's nothing to fix, Carmen. It's been over for a long time. I've found someone else, someone who really understands me. You've always been too wrapped up in your work, too self-absorbed to notice how unhappy I've been." Every word was like a knife. How could he say that? How could he reduce our life together to such a cruel caricature? "Paul, please," I tried again, my voice breaking. "I'm about to head into an important meeting. You can't drop this on me just like that. Let's talk when I'm back in Madrid, face to face." "I'm sure we can. There's nothing more to say," he interrupted. "I've made my decision. Good luck finding a new place to live." "Oh, and good luck with your meeting. You've always been good at that, at work. It's a pity you couldn't devote the same energy to our marriage." And with that, he hung up. I stared at the phone in my hand, unable to believe what had just happened. Tears began to fall uncontrollably, staining the pristine white hotel bedspread. I rose like an automaton and moved to the window. Outside, Seville was awakening. I could see the Giralda in the distance, imposing and beautiful under the morning sun. Life went on, oblivious to the fact that my world had just crumbled. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. I had a meeting in less than 2 hours. I couldn't show up with puffy eyes and a jumbled mind. But how was I supposed to concentrate after this? I forced myself to go to the bathroom and splash cold water on my face. As I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman I didn't recognize. She seemed lost, vulnerable. But beneath that layer of shock and pain, something else began to emerge, a spark of anger, of determination. "No," I said out loud. "I'm not going to let this destroy me." I began applying my makeup with trembling hands at first, but growing more assured with each stroke. With every swipe of mascara, every dab of blush, I felt as if I were donning armor. Paul had hoped to catch me off guard, to leave me with nothing. But he was mistaken if he thought it would be that easy. While dressing in my most elegant suit, a plan began to form in my mind. First, I would win over this client. Then, I would return to Madrid and confront Paul. I wasn't going to let him walk away from our marriage so easily, not after what he'd done. I left the hotel room with my head held high. The concierge greeted me with a smile, oblivious to the turmoil inside me. "Good morning, ma'am. Would you like me to call you a taxi?" "Yes, please," I replied with a calm I didn't feel. "I'm heading to Seville Tower." As I waited for the taxi, I mentally reviewed my presentation. It was for one of the region's leading wineries, and if I managed to close the deal, it could mean a huge breakthrough for my career. Now, more than ever, I needed that success. The ride to Seville Tower was a blur of cobblestone streets and historic buildings. My thoughts oscillated between the presentation I was about to deliver and the bombshell Paul had dropped on me. How could everything change so quickly? Upon arriving at the imposing glass and steel tower, I paused for a moment before entering. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and reminded myself who I was: Carmen Vega, the best in my field, a woman who wouldn't be broken by anyone. Paul wanted to see me fall, but I was determined to prove him wrong. With that thought, I stepped into the building. The receptionist directed me to the floor where the meeting would take place. In the elevator, I caught my reflection in the mirror. My eyes, though slightly red, shone with determination. My posture was upright, defiant. I was ready. The meeting was intense. For 2 hours, I immersed myself in graphs, statistics, and marketing strategies. I answered questions, proposed innovative solutions, and demonstrated why our agency was the best choice to elevate the winery's brand to the next level. When I finished my presentation, there was a moment of silence in the room. Then, the CEO, a serious-looking man named Anthony, stood up and shook my hand. "Impressive, Ms. Vega. Truly impressive. I think we've found the right person to lead our campaign." In that moment, a wave of relief and triumph washed over me. I had done it. Despite everything, despite the devastating blow of that morning, I had managed to give my very best. I left Seville Tower feeling as though I could conquer the world. The euphoria of professional success starkly contrasted with the dull ache still pulsing in my chest. But now I had something to cling to, a proof that I could overcome any obstacle. I decided to walk a bit before returning to the hotel. My steps led me to the banks of the Guadalquivir River. I sat on a bench, watching the water flow slowly by. The afternoon sun bathed the city in a golden glow, and for a moment, I allowed myself to cry. I wept for the marriage I thought I had, for the dreams that had shattered that morning. But as the tears fell, something inside me hardened. Paul had underestimated me. He thought he could discard me with a single phone call, leave me with nothing. But he was wrong. I was stronger than he'd imagined, more resilient. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number of my best friend in Madrid, Lucy. I needed an ally, someone who could be my eyes and ears in the city while I was away. "Lucy," I said when she answered, my voice firm and resolute. "I need your help. Paul wants a divorce, and it's not going to be pretty. But I'm not going to go down without a fight." As I recounted what had happened to Lucy, my mind was already mapping out my next move. Paul had started this war, but I was going to finish it. And when it was all over, he would regret the day he underestimated me. The sun set over Seville, painting the sky in hues of red and orange. It was the end of a day that had begun in devastation, but ended with a silent promise of justice and redemption. The battle was just beginning, and I was ready to face it. The taxi wound its way through the narrow streets of Seville's old quarter, heading toward the modern financial district where my second meeting of the day awaited. After the morning's success, I felt renewed, yet Paul's call still echoed in my mind like a persistent refrain. As I watched historic buildings pass by the window, my thoughts drifted to memories of our first encounter. It was at Complutense University in Madrid, over a decade ago. I was in my final year studying public relations and advertising, and Paul was a law student. We met in the campus cafe during one of those endless afternoons of studying before the final exams. I recall spilling my coffee on his commercial law notes. I was so mortified that I insisted on buying him another coffee and helping him rewrite his notes. He laughed, with that warm laugh he used to have, and told me he'd prefer I invite him to dinner. And that's how it all began. The taxi stopped at a red light, and my gaze wandered to a young couple strolling hand in hand along the sidewalk. How had we gone from being that couple full of dreams and promises to two strangers communicating through cold phone calls? Our early years together were a whirlwind of emotions and plans. We traveled all over Spain, from the beaches of Cadiz to the Picos de Europa, from bustling Barcelona to quiet Salamanca. Each trip was an adventure, each city a new chapter in our love story. I especially remember our trip to Granada. We had saved for months to spend a week there. We visited the Alhambra, lost ourselves in the Albayazin, and one night, While dining at a small restaurant overlooking the illuminated city, Paul proposed. The ring was simple, but to me, it was worth more than any jewel in the world. The taxi started moving again, dragging me out of my memories. I looked at my left hand, where my engagement ring and wedding band shone in the Andalusian sunlight. When had they ceased to mean anything to Paul? Our wedding had been intimate, held in a small church on the outskirts of Madrid. Our families, our closest friends. Lucy, my best friend, had been my maid of honor. I still remember her words during the toast. May your love be like a fine wine, getting better with age. When did that wine turn sour? The taxi stopped in front of a modern office building. I paid the driver and stepped out, feeling the warm Seville sun on my skin. I had a few minutes before the meeting, so I decided to sit on a nearby bench to compose myself. It was then that more recent memories began to surface. The little arguments that had become increasingly frequent. The silent dinners, each of us absorbed in our phones. The nights when Paul came home late from work, his hair still carrying a scent that wasn't mine. There had been signs, I now realized, small cracks in the facade of our perfect marriage that I had chosen to ignore. When had Paul started to distance himself? When had we stopped sharing our dreams and fears? I recalled one evening, a few months ago, when I tried to talk to him about having children. It had always been part of our plan, but lately, whenever I brought it up, Paul evaded the subject. That night, he finally exploded. "Can't you think about something other than work and babies?" he shouted. "Don't you realize life is about more than that?" His words hurt more than I cared to admit at the time. When had my desire to start a family become something so contemptible to him? I glanced at my watch. There were 5 minutes until the meeting. I got up from the bench, smoothed my skirt, and took a deep breath. I couldn't let these memories destabilize me. I had a job to do, a future to secure. As I walked toward the building, another memory rushed in. It was just a few weeks before this trip to Seville. Paul and I were having dinner at home, another silent dinner. Suddenly, he set down his cutlery and stared at me. "Carmen," he said in an unusually soft voice, "are you happy?" The question caught me off guard. Happy? I had a job I loved, a husband I cared for, despite our recent issues, a comfortable life. But was I happy? "Of course I am," I replied automatically. "Why do you ask?" Paul simply shook his head and returned to his meal. Now I realize that might have been the moment when we could have really talked, when we might have tried to fix what was breaking. But I let it pass, too scared to face the truth. I entered the office building, greeted the receptionist, and made my way to the elevator. As it ascended, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back seemed strong, confident. But I knew the truth. Inside, I was broken, confused, scared. When the elevator doors opened, I stepped into the corridor and paused for a moment before entering the meeting room. I closed my eyes, took another deep breath, trying to push aside all those memories, all those what-ifs. When I opened my eyes, I had made a decision. Yes, Paul had hurt me deeply. Yes, our marriage was probably beyond repair. But I wasn't going to let that define me. I wasn't going to be the victim in this story. I entered the meeting room with my head held high. The winery's marketing team was already there, waiting for me. I greeted them with a smile I hoped looked genuine. "Good morning, everyone," I said, my voice firm and assured. "Let's talk about taking your brand to the next level." As I began my presentation, I felt that part of me stayed behind in that corridor, the part that still believed in happily ever after, the part that still hoped Paul might change his mind. That part would have to wait. Now, I had work to do. The meeting was a success. When it ended, the marketing director shook my hand enthusiastically. "Ms. Vega, you've exceeded our expectations. I think this is the beginning of a very fruitful collaboration." I left the building feeling strangely light. The afternoon sun bathed Madrid in a golden glow, and for a moment, I allowed myself to appreciate the beauty of the city. I decided to take a walk before returning to the hotel. My steps carried me to Plaza de España. I sat on one of the tiled benches, admiring the magnificent architecture. Couples strolled hand in hand, families laughed together, tourists snapped photos. Life went on, despite everything. I pulled out my phone and stared at the screen. No messages from Paul. No missed calls. Had it really been so easy for him to erase me from his life? With a sigh, I dialed Lucy's number. I needed to talk to someone. I needed a plan. "Lucy," I said when she answered, "I need you to help me with something. When I get back to Madrid, I'm going to need a place to stay. And a good lawyer." As I spoke with Lucy, I felt something hardening within me. The memories of my life with Paul were still there, but they no longer paralyzed me. Instead, they gave me strength. Strength to move forward, to fight for what was mine, to build a new life. The sun began to set over Seville, tinting the sky with orange and pink. It was the end of a day that had begun with pain and confusion, but that was ending with newfound determination. The memories had shattered, yes. But from those fragments, I was going to build something new. Something stronger. Something that would be entirely mine. The flight from Seville to Madrid was short, yet it felt like an eternity to me. Every kilometer bringing me closer to home made my heart beat faster, a mix of anxiety and determination growing in my chest. When the plane finally landed at Barajas Airport, I took a deep breath. I was back in Madrid, the city that had been my home for so many years, the city where Paul and I had built our life together. And now, it was the city where I'd have to face the reality of our shattered marriage. Lucy was waiting for me at the arrivals terminal. Seeing her, I felt a surge of relief and gratitude. Her face showed concern, but also unwavering determination. We hugged tightly, words unnecessary. "Are you ready?" she asked simply as we pulled apart. I nodded. As ready as I can be. The drive from the airport to my former apartment in the Chimbery neighborhood was silent. Lucy respected my need to mentally prepare for what awaited me. As we neared, memories began to flood back. Every street, every corner had a story. There was the park where Paul and I used to stroll on Sunday mornings. There, the Italian restaurant where we celebrated our 5th anniversary. And further on, the furniture store where we picked out our first sofa, amicably debating colors and styles. Finally, we arrived. The building loomed before me, both imposing and familiar. Lucy parked and looked at me. "Do you want me to come up with you?" she offered. I shook my head. "I need to do this alone." "But thank you, Lucy, for everything." She nodded, understanding. "I'll be here if you need me. Just call." With trembling legs, I got out of the car and entered the lobby. The elevator seemed smaller than I remembered, or perhaps it was I who now felt larger, swollen with the weight of the situation. When the doors opened on my floor, I froze for a moment. What awaited me behind that door? With a trembling hand, I inserted the key into the lock. The familiar click sounded deafening in the silent corridor. I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The atmosphere hit me like a wall. The silence was oppressive, almost tangible. I took a few steps into the apartment and stopped, overwhelmed. Everything looked the same, yet completely different. The furniture was in place, the curtains drawn to let in the late Madrid light. But something was missing. Life was missing. I moved through the living room as if in a trance. The shelves, once filled with books, photos, and souvenirs from our travels, were now half empty. Paul had taken his belongings, leaving gaps that screamed his absence. Our sofa, the one on which we had spent countless nights curled up watching movies, now seemed too large, too empty. On the dining table, a white envelope caught my attention. My heart skipped a beat as I recognized Paul's neat handwriting. With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside was a copy of the divorce papers and a brief note. "Carmen, I hope this makes the process clearer. I've spoken with my lawyer and arranged for him to contact you. Please, don't make this any harder than it needs to be. Good luck, Paul." Those words hit me like a punch in the gut. Good luck. After 10 years together, was that all he had to say? Not even an apology, not even an explanation. Only cold practicality. The fury I had been holding back since that call in Seville finally exploded. With a cry of rage, I crumpled the note and flung it against the wall. The tears I'd been suppressing began to flow freely. I collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. I don't know how long I lay there, crying on the living room floor. When I finally managed to calm down, I felt empty, exhausted. but also, strangely, lighter, as if I had expelled all the pain and confusion I'd been carrying since Paul's call. Slowly, I got up and began moving through the apartment with a purpose. I needed to know exactly what Paul had taken and what he'd left behind. In the kitchen, I noticed some appliances and dishes were missing. In the study, his computer and some books had disappeared. It was in the study that I made a discovery that chilled me to the bone. Hidden behind some boxes in the closet, I found a folder filled with financial documents. As I reviewed them, my shock turned to indignation. Paul had been siphoning money from our joint accounts for months, perhaps years. He had been planning this for a long time, ensuring he'd have a financial cushion while leaving me high and dry. The fury surged within me again, but this time it was different. It was a cold, calculated rage. Paul hadn't just betrayed me emotionally, he'd betrayed me financially as well. He had been planning to leave me with nothing, and he almost succeeded. But he was wrong to underestimate me. Clutching the documents, I returned to the living room and called Lucy. "Come up," I said when she answered. "And bring your laptop. We have work to do." When Lucy arrived, I showed her what I'd found. Her eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed with determination. "That bastard," she muttered. "He won't get away with this, Carmen. I promise you." For the next several hours, Lucy and I worked tirelessly. We made copies of every document, took photos of the empty spaces in the apartment, and compiled a detailed list of everything missing. Lucy, who worked at a law firm, helped me understand the legal aspects of our situation. "This is fraud, Carmen," she explained. "Paul can't just take money from your joint accounts without your consent. And he definitely can't sell the apartment without your signature." As the night wore on, our plan began to take shape. We would contact a lawyer specializing in divorce first thing in the morning. We would file a fraud lawsuit. We would fight for every penny that was rightfully mine. When Lucy finally left, close to midnight, I felt exhausted but stronger than ever. Paul had tried to leave me with nothing, but he had made a crucial mistake. He left evidence of his actions. That night, I slept in our bed for the last time. In the morning, I would begin searching for a new place to live. I couldn't stay in this apartment filled with memories and betrayal. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought about the woman I had been when I left this apartment a few days ago, excited about my business trip to Seville. That woman was gone now. In her place was a new Carmen. A stronger, wiser, and decidedly angrier Carmen. Paul wanted war. And war he would get. The following days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Between meetings with lawyers, searching for a new apartment, and long conversations with Lucy, I barely had time to process all that was happening emotionally. But in those quiet moments, when the bustle of Madrid subsided and I was alone with my thoughts, a question began to grow. Who was she? Who was the woman for whom Paul had decided to throw away 10 years of marriage? It was Lucy who finally provided the information I was seeking. One afternoon, while we were having coffee at a terrace on Paseo de la Castellana, she pulled out her phone and showed me a photo on Instagram with an apologetic look on her face. "Carmen, I think you should see this," she said, scrolling until she revealed an image. The picture hit me like a punch to the gut. There was Paul, smiling wider than I'd seen him in years, with his arm around a young, attractive woman. The caption read, "New chapter, new adventures. #love, #happiness. Her name is Claudia," Lucy explained softly. "She works at the Reina Sofia Art Gallery. From what I've gathered, they met a few months ago at a gallery event." I stared at the image, trying to process what I was seeing. Claudia was beautiful, there was no denying that. Dark hair, big eyes, a radiant smile. She looked happy, carefree. Young, much younger than me. "How old is she?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Lucy hesitated before replying. 28. 8 years younger than me. The age difference hit me hard. Was that what Paul wanted? Someone younger, more exciting? For the next few days, I became obsessed with Claudia. I scoured all her social media, searching for clues about her relationship with Paul. Every photo, every post felt like a dagger to my heart. "New beginning," one caption read. "Finally someone who understands me," proclaimed another. The self-pity in her words deeply irritated me. Didn't she know she was destroying a marriage? Or did she simply not care? That's when I made an impulsive decision. I needed to see her in person. I needed to face the reality of the situation, no matter how painful. The Reina Sofia Art Gallery was a place I knew well. Paul and I used to visit it often in our early years together, strolling through its halls, discussing art and our dreams for the future. Now, as I walked its corridors, every step felt like a mockery of those memories. It didn't take long to find Claudia. She was in one of the main galleries, passionately explaining a piece to a group of visitors. I lingered at the back, watching her. Her enthusiasm was evident. Her eyes sparkled as she talked about the painting. For a moment, I could see what Paul might have seen in her. When the group dispersed, I approached her. My heart pounded, but I maintained my composure. "Excuse me," I said with a smile I hoped looked genuine. "I've been told you're the best when it comes to advising on contemporary art. I'm interested in acquiring a few pieces for my office." Claudia turned to me with a professional smile. "Of course, I'd be happy to help. I'm Claudia, and you are?" "Carmen," I replied, carefully observing her reaction. "Carmen Vega." The effect was instantaneous. Claudia's smile faltered. Her eyes widened with surprise and something that looked like guilt? Fear? It was only for a moment, but it was enough to confirm my suspicions. She knew exactly who I was. "Oh," she said, trying to regain her composure. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Ms. Vega. How can I help you exactly?" I decided to maintain the pretense a bit longer. "I'm looking for something modern, something that speaks of new beginnings. Do you have any suggestions?" Claudia nodded, clearly uncomfortable but striving to remain professional. She began guiding me through the gallery, talking about different artists and styles. I listened half-heartedly, more interested in watching her. What had Paul seen in her that he hadn't seen in me? Was it just her youth, or was there something more? Finally, after a few minutes of barely concealed tension, I decided I'd had enough. I stopped in front of an abstract painting, a burst of colors and shapes that seemed to mirror the chaos my life had become. "Claudia," I said softly, turning to her, "we both know I'm not here for the art." She froze, her eyes fixed on me. For a moment, it seemed she might deny everything, but then her shoulders slumped slightly. "I'm sorry," she whispered. We didn't want things to turn out this way." A rush of emotions, anger, pain, confusion, washed over me. But I forced myself to stay calm. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely controlled. Claudia hesitated before answering. "We met 6 months ago. But nothing happened until 2 months ago." 2 months. 2 months during which Paul had been leading a double life, sharing my bed while planning to leave me for this woman. "Did you know he was married?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Claudia nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "He told me his marriage was over, that he was just waiting for the right moment to tell you." I almost laughed. The right moment? Like a cold phone call while I was in another city? "Well," I said, my voice laced with irony, "I guess he found his moment." "I hope you both are very happy together." I turned to leave, but before I did, I paused and looked at Claudia one last time. "Just one thing. When Paul tells you he's waiting for the right moment for something, don't believe him. That moment will never come." I left the gallery feeling strangely lighter. Seeing Claudia, speaking with her, in some way made everything more real. She was no longer a mysterious rival, a faceless figure who had stolen my husband. She was just a woman, as imperfect and vulnerable as I was. Walking through the streets of Madrid, my mind whirled. Part of me wanted to hate Claudia, to blame her for the destruction of my marriage. But another part, a more rational part, knew that the real fault lay with Paul. He was the one who had taken vows, who had promised to love and respect me. And he was the one who had broken those promises. I arrived at my new apartment, a small studio in the Malasana neighborhood that I had rented temporarily. It was small and sparsely furnished, but it was mine. A new beginning. As I sat on the sofa, my phone rang. It was a message from Lucy. "How did it go? Are you okay?" I stared at the message for a long moment, pondering my reply. Was I okay? No, I wasn't. But I wasn't as broken as I thought. I'll survive, I finally replied. In fact, I think I'll be better than ever. And as I typed those words, I realized they were true. Seeing Claudia, confronting the reality of the situation had been painful, but it was also liberating. I was no longer the betrayed wife, the victim in the story. I was Carmen Vega, a strong, independent woman ready to write her own chapter. That night, as Madrid plunged into darkness, I sat on the small terrace of my new apartment. With a glass of wine in hand, I looked up at the starry sky and, for the first time in weeks, smiled. The future was uncertain, yes, but it was also full of possibilities. And I was ready to explore them all. Days turned into weeks and weeks into a month. Madrid simmered under the August sun, but I barely noticed. My life had become a routine of intense work, meetings with lawyers, and sleepless nights in my small Malesana apartment. Every day was another step in my plan to rebuild my life and make sure Paul wouldn't get away with it. It was during one of those sleepless nights that I made the decision. It was time to confront Paul face to face. No more cold phone calls, no more messages through lawyers. I needed to see him, needed him to look me in the eyes and tell me why he had chosen to throw away 10 years of marriage. The next morning, I called Lucy. "I need you to help me with something," I said without preamble. "Anything," she replied, her loyalty evident in her voice. "I need to know where Paul is living now." There was a moment of silence on the other end. "Carmen, are you sure this is a good idea?" "No," I admitted, "but it's necessary." Lucy sighed but didn't argue further. "I'll call you as soon as I have the information." I spent the rest of the day in anxious anticipation, mentally rehearsing everything I wanted to say to Paul, every question I needed answered. When Lucy finally called with the address, I felt a mix of fear and determination. Paul's apartment was in an elegant building in the Salamanca district. Of course, I thought bitterly. He had always favored luxurious places. As I rode the elevator up, my heart pounded. Would Claudia be there? How would Paul react when he saw me? I took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. The seconds that ticked by before the door opened felt like an eternity. And then, there he was. Paul stood frozen in the doorway, eyes wide with surprise. "Carmen," he finally said in a barely audible whisper. "What are you doing here?" I looked him straight in the eye, trying to reconcile this man with the husband I had known for so long. He looked thinner, with dark circles under his eyes. Was it guilt? Or simply the stress of his new life? "I think you owe me some explanations," I said firmly, despite the tumult raging inside me. Paul hesitated for a moment, then nodded and stepped aside to let me in. The apartment was exactly as I had imagined, modern, minimalist, with stunning views of Madrid, so different from our cozy flat in Chimbery. We sat on the sofa, an uncomfortable distance between us. For a while, neither of us spoke. There was so much to say, and yet words felt insufficient. "Why, Paul?" I finally asked. "Why like this? A phone call? After 10 years. Paul ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I knew all too well. "I'm sorry, Carmen. I know I did wrong. I didn't know how to tell you face to face." "You didn't know how to tell me?" I repeated, disbelief tinting my voice. "How about Carmen? I'm no longer happy in our marriage." Or, "Carmen, I think we need to talk?" Anything would have been better than that call. Paul nodded, guilt plain on his face. "You're right. I handled it terribly. I was scared." "Scared?" I asked, anger beginning to bubble within me. "Scared of what?" "Of me? Of the woman you shared a life with for a decade. Of everything," he admitted. "Of hurting you, of facing the reality that our marriage was falling apart, of admitting that I had failed." I looked at him, really looked at him. This man, who had once been my partner, my friend, my lover, when had we become strangers? "And Claudia?" I asked, the question that had been burning in my mind for weeks. "How long?" Paul closed his eyes as if pained by the memory. "I met her 6 months ago. But nothing happened until 2 months," I finished for him. "I know. I met her." His eyes shot open, surprise etched on his face. "You met her? When? How?" "That doesn't matter," I said, dismissing the topic with a wave of my hand. "What matters is that you lied." You lied to both of us. Paul slumped onto the sofa, defeat written in every line of his body. I know, and I'm sorry. I really am, Carmen. I felt my anger give way to deep exhaustion. Sorry isn't enough, Paul. Not after what you've done. That was when I decided to play my final card. I pulled the folder of financial documents I had found in our old apartment from my purse. Can you explain this? I asked, throwing the papers onto the coffee table. Paul visibly paled. His eyes darted between the documents and my face, panic growing in them. Carmen, I can explain, he began, but I interrupted him. Can you? Can you explain how you siphoned money from our joint accounts for months? How you plan to leave me with nothing? Paul jumped up and began pacing the room. It wasn't like that. I was just trying to make sure I'd have something to start over with. At my expense? I asked, my voice dangerously low. At the expense of the woman who stood by you for 10 years? Paul stopped and looked at me with a mix of fear and regret. I'm sorry, he repeated, but the words rang hollow. I rose, feeling an odd calm take over me. No, Paul. I'm the one who should be sorry. I'm sorry for trusting you. I'm sorry for believing you were better than this. I pulled out another set of papers from my purse and placed them on the table. These are the documents for the lawsuit I'm filing against you for financial fraud. My lawyer will be in touch with yours. Paul's face drained of color. Carmen, please. We can settle this another way. We don't have to involve the courts. I stared him down, really looking at him, the man I once loved, who had once been my whole world. Now, he was just a stranger, someone who had betrayed me in the worst possible way. It's too late for that, Paul, I said softly. You chose this path when you decided to deceive me, when you chose to steal from me. Now you'll have to face the consequences. I walked toward the door, feeling as if a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Before leaving, I turned for one last look. Goodbye, Paul. I hope your new life is worth it. I left the apartment without looking back, the sound of the door closing behind me marking the end of a chapter. In the elevator, I allowed myself a moment to breathe, to process what had just happened. Stepping out onto the street, the Madrid sun hit me hard. But for the first time in weeks, I felt I could breathe freely. The confrontation had been tough, but necessary. I was no longer the victim in this story. I was a strong woman, determined to fight for what was right. I pulled out my phone and dialed Lucy's number. How did it go? She asked as soon as I answered. Difficult, I admitted, but necessary. And Lucy, yes? I think I'm finally ready to move on. As I walked through the streets of Madrid, I felt a new energy surging within me. The confrontation with Paul wasn't the end, it was the beginning. The beginning of my new life, of my new self. And I was ready for whatever came next. The sun shone over Madrid, and for the first time in a long while, I felt it shone for me too. Autumn arrived in Madrid, painting the trees in Retiro Park with hues of gold and red. 3 months had passed since my confrontation with Paul, and my life had done a complete 180. The legal process had been long and exhausting, but it was finally over. Thanks to the evidence I'd gathered and the excellent work of my lawyer, I had managed to reclaim what was rightfully mine. That October morning, I found myself sitting on the terrace of my new apartment in the Chueca neighborhood, a steaming cup of coffee in hand. From here, I could see the city awakening, the streets gradually filling with hurried locals and early-rising tourists. It was a new day in more ways than one. My phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from Lucy. Ready for the big day? I smiled. Today was the day I would finally sign the contract for my very own advertising agency. After years of working for others, I was finally going to be my own boss. It was a bold step, but I felt ready for the challenge. More than ready, I replied. See you at the notary at 11. As I prepared to leave, I couldn't help but reflect on how I'd come this far. The journey hadn't been easy. There were days when pain and anger threatened to consume me, nights when I cried myself to sleep. But with each passing day, I grew stronger. Lucy's support had been invaluable. She had been by my side every step of the way, offering a shoulder to cry on when I needed it and a kick in the pants when I sank into self-pity. She was the one who had encouraged me to pursue my dream of having my own agency. You're brilliant at what you do, Carmen, she had told me one night as we shared a bottle of wine. Why not take this opportunity to reinvent yourself completely? And so I did. I invested part of the money I'd recovered from the divorce into starting my own agency. It was a process that was both terrifying and exhilarating, filled with sleepless nights working on the business plan and frantic days meeting potential clients and collaborators. I left my apartment and headed for the metro. Madrid pulsed with energy around me, and I felt a part of that vibrant flow. I was no longer the shattered woman who had returned from Seville months ago. I was a new version of myself, stronger and more determined than ever. At the notary's office, Lucy waited with a radiant smile. She gave me a warm hug before we went in together. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. The contract signing was swift and uneventful. When the notary handed me the signed copy, a wave of emotion surged through me. It was real. I was the owner of my own company. To celebrate, Lucy and I went to a small restaurant in La Latina for lunch. As we toasted with a glass of cava, I couldn't help but think about how much my life had changed. "You know," I said, looking at Lucy, "a few months ago when Paul called to say he wanted a divorce, I thought my life was over. I felt as if the ground had been ripped out from under me." Lucy nodded sympathetically. "I remember. You were devastated." I admitted. But now I realized that that call was the best thing that could have happened to me. Lucy raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Really?" I nodded. "Yes." It forced me to face the truth about my marriage. To realize that I had lost myself in that relationship. And it gave me the chance to rediscover who I really am. "Look at you now," Lucy smiled. "Own your own company, living in a fabulous apartment, stronger than ever." I raised my glass. "To new beginnings." "To new beginnings," Lucy echoed, clinking her glass with mine. After lunch, I decided to take a stroll through central Madrid. My feet carried me to Puerta del Sol, the beating heart of the city. I stopped in front of the statue of the bear and the strawberry tree, watching tourists take photos beside it. Then I saw him. Paul was across the square, hand in hand with Claudia. For a moment, our eyes met. I saw surprise in his, quickly followed by something that looked like remorse? Guilt? But to my astonishment, I felt nothing. No pain, no anger, not even resentment. Just a calm indifference. Paul no longer held any power over me. I held his gaze for another second, then gave a slight nod and continued on my way. I heard him calling, but I didn't turn back. I had nothing left to say. That night, as I sat on the terrace watching the sunset over Madrid, I reflected on the journey I'd been on in recent months. I had moved from the deepest pain to a peace I'd never known. I had discovered a strength within me that I never imagined existed. My phone rang. It was a message from an unknown number. I opened it with curiosity. "Carmen, it's Paul. I saw you today at Sol. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. I know it's probably too late, but I hope someday you can forgive me. I wish you all the happiness in the world. You deserve it." I read the message several times, letting the words sink in. A few months ago, this message would have shattered me. I would have cried, caught between pain and a glimmer of hope. But now, I smiled softly and typed a response. "Thank you, Paul. I wish you the best too. Goodbye." I sent the message and then deleted Paul's number from my phone. It was the final tie to my old life, and now it was cut. I poured myself a glass of wine and returned to the terrace. Madrid spread out before me, a sea of lights sparkling in the night. I thought about everything that had happened, everything I had learned. I had learned that love doesn't always last forever, and that's okay. I had learned that pain can be a great teacher if you're willing to listen to its lessons. I had learned that I am stronger than I ever imagined. But most of all, I had learned that happiness doesn't depend on someone else. Happiness comes from within, from knowing yourself, from being true to who you are. I lifted my glass toward Madrid's horizon, toasting silently to my new life, to my new self. The future was uncertain, but it no longer scared me. I was ready for whatever came next, ready to write the next chapter of my story. And this time, it would be entirely mine. As night fell over Madrid, I felt a deep sense of peace. The woman I had been, the wounded, betrayed wife, was no more. In her place stood a new Carmen. Wiser, stronger, freer. Tomorrow would be the first day of my new life as an entrepreneur. There would be challenges, undoubtedly. Moments of doubt and fear. But there would also be triumphs, laughter, new friendships, and perhaps even new love. But for now, in this moment, I was perfectly content just being me. Carmen Vega, master of her own destiny. The sun finally set, and the stars began to twinkle over Madrid. It was a beautiful night, the beginning of something new. And I was ready to live it fully. With one last look at the city that had witnessed my transformation, I went inside my apartment. Tomorrow would be a new day, the first day of the rest of my life. And I couldn't wait to live it,